What would you do if you woke up to find your front yard blocked by deadly barbed wire, installed by the very person meant to protect your community? I still remember that crisp morning when everything changed. I woke up, as usual, to the sound of birds chirping and the warm light of dawn sneaking through the blinds. I made myself a cup of coffee and headed out to greet the day. But instead of the familiar view of my well-tended lawn, I was met with a sight that made my heart skip a beat. A thick strand of barbed wire was strung across my property line, looping around my driveway and even draping over the fence that separated my yard from my neighbors. The wire wasn't haphazardly placed. It looked professional. Metal posts had been firmly drilled into the ground, and the wire was pulled so taut that it glinted dangerously in the early sunlight. I stood there, blinking in disbelief. What in the world? I muttered, my mind racing to piece together how this could possibly be happening. Before I could gather my thoughts, I heard a familiar clearing of a throat behind me. I turned around, and there she was, HOA Karen. She stood with her arms crossed, clad in a pastel sweater that somehow accentuated her air of self-importance. With a smug smile, she said, "I took the liberty of installing a security measure. It's for the good of the community." Her tone dripped with faux politeness, as if she were offering a friendly suggestion rather than declaring an act of vandalism. Security measure? I echoed, struggling to understand. "Karen, this isn't a security camera or a warning sign. It's barbed wire. You've blocked my access and put us all at risk." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. "My dear, your property has been a constant source of complaints. The board agreed that your yard was a problem. I'm simply enforcing our community standards." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, as if she were reciting a script from a community newsletter. I could feel my frustration boiling. Standards? My lawn is always trimmed. My fence is freshly painted. There's nothing wrong with my property. You installed this without any permission from the homeowners. This isn't how things work. At that moment, my wife stepped outside, her eyes filled with equal parts disbelief and anger. "You can't just turn our home into a fortress, Karen," she exclaimed. Her words echoed the growing concern of our neighbors, many of whom had started to peek out of their windows, whispering among themselves. I took a deep breath and asked, "Have you ever felt powerless when someone you trust abuses their authority? Today, it feels like I am that person." The question wasn't just for Karen, it was for all of us. Realizing that dialogue wasn't going to change her mind, I decided to take action. I filed a formal complaint with the city the very same day, complete with photos of the barbed wire and documentation that clearly showed Karen had no legal right to make such modifications. The situation was spiraling, and a sense of injustice hung in the air like a storm cloud. Over the next day, I could feel the tension in the neighborhood mounting. Neighbors who had once exchanged friendly waves now wore worried expressions. Some approached me quietly, confiding that they, too, had felt harassed by Karen's constant nitpicking and overreach. It became clear that this was more than just about a piece of metal wire. It was about power, control, and the erosion of our once peaceful community. 2 days later, the sound of a city inspector's knock shattered the uneasy calm. He arrived promptly, clipboard in hand, and his eyes scanned the barbed wire with an air of disapproval. "This installation is in violation of multiple safety codes," he stated firmly. "It obstructs emergency access and poses a significant danger to residents. You must remove it immediately." Karen, standing in her doorway with a forced smile, tried to maintain her composure. "It's for community safety," she insisted. But the inspector was unyielding. "Ma'am, you were given 48 hours to comply. If you do not remove this installation, the city will do it for you, and you will be fined heavily." Instead of heeding the warning, Karen doubled down. Over the next 48 hours, not only did she refuse to remove the barbed wire, she went a step further by adding padlocks to the metal posts. Her actions were a clear message. She intended to maintain her grip on power at any cost. Meanwhile, the community's frustration grew. Neighbors began sharing their own stories, complaints about unfair fines, bogus violation notices, and even threats of eviction over trivial matters. Within a week, the situation reached its breaking point. On the morning of the third day, I was sipping my coffee when I noticed a convoy of city maintenance trucks and a police cruiser pulling up near Karen's house. The atmosphere turned electric with anticipation and a hint of relief. This was our chance to reclaim our neighborhood. I stepped onto my porch and watched as city workers, equipped with bolt cutters and power tools, approached the barbed wire. Karen burst out of her house, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, trying to block the workers' progress. One of the officers calmly replied, "Ma'am, you have 48 hours to comply with the removal order. Since you failed to do so, the city is now removing the illegal installation." Despite her protests and wild accusations, the workers methodically dismantled the barbed wire. The metal posts were pried from the ground, and the twisted wire was cut and hauled away. In less than 20 minutes, the threat that had loomed over our community was gone, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from our shoulders. But Karen's defiance did not end there. Determined to hold on to her authority, she tried to interfere further. As she lunged toward one of the workers, attempting to block their path, an officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, interfering with city officials is a serious offense. Please step back," he warned. Her response was a mixture of trembling anger and outright threats. "I'll sue all of you," she shouted. Yet, her outburst only sealed her fate. In the ensuing chaos, more evidence of Karen's long-standing abuse began to surface. Several neighbors, emboldened by the city's intervention, came forward with their own accounts of her tyranny. An elderly gentleman named Mr. Peterson recounted how Karen had once threatened him with eviction for not trimming his garden just right, despite his yard being immaculate. Another family, the Rodriguezes, revealed that they had received daily notices about their porch decor, violations that never even existed. Each story painted a picture of a woman who had been using her position to bully and extort her neighbors for years. The turning point came when the police returned with a new development. Karen was escorted out of her house in handcuffs. "You are being charged with fraud, harassment, and misappropriation of HOA funds," announced the lead officer, his voice steady and resolute. The words echoed through the neighborhood. In that moment, the woman who had wielded power like a weapon was reduced to a cautionary tale, a reminder that no one is above the law. As Karen was taken away, murmurs of relief and vindication rippled through the community. In the days that followed, the city held a meeting with the residents. It became clear that Karen's actions had not only endangered our safety, but had also sown discord among neighbors. One by one, those who had once been intimidated by her began to speak up. The board members, who had long turned a blind eye to her abusive practices, were forced to confront the truth. In a dramatic vote that felt like the final closing of a dark chapter, the entire HOA was dissolved. I remember standing on my porch that evening, looking out at a neighborhood slowly coming back to life. Neighbors gathered for a spontaneous block party, sharing laughs, food, and stories. Children played freely on the streets, and for the first time in years, there was an overwhelming sense of unity and peace. In that moment, I couldn't help but ask myself, and all of you watching, what would our community look like if every voice was heard and every individual was treated with respect? Karen's downfall was more than just the removal of barbed wire. It was the dismantling of a reign built on fear and control. Her arrest, the fines imposed, and the subsequent trial, where she was found guilty on multiple counts, served as a powerful lesson. No matter how entrenched power might seem, the collective strength of a community can overcome even the most oppressive forces. In the aftermath, restitution was ordered. Karen had to repay the neighborhood for the excessive fines and fees she had imposed over the years. When the checks arrived in our mailboxes, it wasn't just about getting money back. It was about reclaiming our dignity and our right to feel safe in our own homes. I often think about that tumultuous time and how it forced us to confront uncomfortable questions about authority and community. Have you ever wondered why we allow a single voice to dominate and intimidate the rest? How different might our lives be if we stood up for one another, no matter how small the complaint might seem? Today, our streets are free of barbed wire. Our community has healed, and in its place, a newfound respect and camaraderie has blossomed. Neighbors who once tiptoed around each other now openly share their joys and challenges. The experience taught us that true security doesn't come from imposing fear, it comes from mutual respect and understanding. As I sit here, reflecting on all that happened, I realize that the real victory wasn't the removal of metal and wire, but the restoration of our community's soul. We learned that, even in the face of injustice, standing together can create a ripple effect of change that transforms lives. So, as you go about your day, I invite you to think, what small act of kindness or defiance can you offer to help create a better, more compassionate world? Could it be as simple as lending an ear to a neighbor in need, or perhaps standing up when you see something wrong? The choice is yours, and sometimes, one brave act is all it takes to turn the tide. In the weeks that followed, our neighborhood transformed. The oppressive rules were tossed aside, replaced by a spirit of collaboration and freedom. Homeowners felt empowered to decorate their yards, paint their fences in bright colors, and express themselves without fear of arbitrary fines. It was as if the removal of the barbed wire had also cut away the chains of suppression that had held us back for so long. Even though Karen's legacy still loomed as a cautionary tale, it ultimately became a symbol of what happens when one person's overreach is met with the courage of a community. And now, every time I walk past my front yard, I am reminded not of the dark days of barbed wire and tyranny, but of the light that can shine through when we all stand together. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, every community has the power to change its fate, one kind, determined, and united step at a time. What are your thoughts? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to stand up against an unfair system? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more Storytime adventures.